Get back into the kitchen and make me a sandwich. Submission in the home. Not what you might think. Really get a handle on this, we have to go back to our very beginning when we were in Eden. Genesis 5:1-2 says, "This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day that God created human beings, in the likeness of God he made them. Male and female he created he them, and he blessed them and called their name Adam in the day that they were created." That's interesting. They were both named Adam. The fact that they share that name means they have a common mission. In Genesis 1:26 we read, "And God said, let us make man in our image and after our likeness, and let us have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over the cattle and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So we are to be a picture of God. That's the word image, selem, meaning picture. It's very simple. But likeness, that's the word damut, meaning a role, like a role in a play. So as God creates, we create things. We're not able to tear things out of nothing and bring things to life like only He can. But we do create, we do form, we do fill. And that is our mission as men and women. We're viceroys over the earth. We had Eden, a sanctuary where we didn't know death, and we were told to go and tread down the earth. And you wouldn't tread down something that was already perfect. So our mission was to spread what we had in Eden over the whole earth. And we gave it all away. We blew it. We had to have Jesus buy it back for us. But that's where we once were. And that's what Jesus is buying back for us. That tells us who we are. We're kings and queens. So in Genesis 2:18, where it's really talking about the covenant between God and man, because it uses his covenant name there. When you see the word Lord in your English Bibles with all capital letters, that's where the name Yod-He-Vav-He is the covenant name that God gave to Moses in Genesis 3. He told Moses that was his name. So when he describes the creation of the woman from Adam's side, he calls her Ezer Kenegdo. Ezer means help, and Neged means in front of. So in a positive light, this means that she is the help right in front of him. And then the negative light, which is also a good thing, it means that she confronts him to his face. And think about that even for a minute. If she is subservient to him, if she's his subordinate, she cannot, even in the least, she would not be able to confront him like that. Now, an objection that you might raise is that that was before the fall. But keep in mind that Jesus paid the price to reverse the curse for us, to buy back our rights as kings and queens over the earth. So it really would not be the Christian way to keep her in subservience. In Genesis 3:16, we find him telling the man and the woman how things are going to be now that they've chosen disobedience. When they took from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they were claiming for themselves the right to determine what is good and what is evil, when that right really belongs only to God. It's so they were on their own in a hostile world at this point and no longer in charge of everything, although spiritually they loosely had that position. It's just that they had sold the rights. So things were going to go rough for them. They would bear children in sorrow and pain. And it's not just physical pain, it's sadness. And Adam would exhaust himself trying to support his family, earning food by the sweat of his brow. But God told Eve, he said, "Your desire shall be to usurp your husband, and he shall govern you." And if you check your English translation, you're going to notice the word usurp is not in there. But the word for desire that's translated as desire in Genesis 3:16 is the exact same word in Genesis 4:7 when God is telling Cain that sin wishes to usurp him, to take him over. And so we're being told here that in our fallen condition, the women are going to try and take away their husband's position as head of the house, and the men are going to try to govern the women. And it wasn't supposed to be this way. We were supposed to be partners. In Genesis 11:27-25:11, we read about the journey, the saga of Abraham and Sarah. You may remember Abraham is held up as an example of faith to us. And you might not see it after reading it only once or twice, but after reading it many times, you begin to realize that what you're seeing in those chapters is a man and a woman that each had their own calling from God, and that they were brought together. God had willed it that they come together and form their calling and their vision into one. Now, granted, Abraham's vision would determine the direction of the mission of that marriage, but it would be inevitable that his vision would be modified by incorporating her vision, and that she would be using her vision to help them realize their vision together. And if you read 1 Peter 3:1-8, you'll notice that it makes more sense if you read it in light of the wife supporting her husband. There's a verse that's especially jarring to us 21st century Americans where it says in verse 6 of 1 Peter chapter 3, it says, submitting to their own husbands as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And in a more contemporary English, we might just say boss by the time you take into account all the linguistic and cultural factors. But the point there is that she was heeding his words in order to make sure that their mission together as a couple got done. And the word used there for submit is hopeklosen, meaning hopo is under, and akuo means I hear. So hopeklosen means she was hearing under him. In other words, she was taking his words in and then acting accordingly. And if you really think about it, if you realize that's not necessarily, especially if you've been married for a while, you're going to understand that's not necessarily just strict obedience. It is possible for a member of the couple to give the other some words that should be carried out. But maybe there's a mistake, and so the other spouse makes whatever changes are necessary to make sure the desired outcome comes about. So it's not strict blind obedience as we have been taught. And we also find in Ephesians chapter 5 a word that is translated as submit, but it's a different word. This word is opotasso, meaning to place oneself under another's command, to make oneself subordinate to another. And before it's even applied to marriage, it's applied to the Christian community, of one Christian to another, regardless of rank. We should always put ourselves beneath each other when it comes to service. And Jesus set this example for us when he washed the disciples' feet. That ritual has lost meaning in our modern churches. It's become sort of a weird religious thing, but in its original context, it was deeply meaningful, because as you walked on those roads in those days, where instead of cars, it was all camels and donkeys, you were sure to step in a lot of poop, which would make you generally unhygienic and just dirty and stinky. You wouldn't want to eat a meal that way. So you would clearly want your feet cleaned, and the servant of the house usually did that, and it was a very unpleasant task. Jesus, by washing their feet, was showing a lot of practical concern and love to his students. That is our lifestyle towards each other as Christians. And then later in Ephesians chapter 5, Paul does apply that to marriage. So no, we don't get to treat our wives like employees or slaves or chattel. If you look in 1 Peter 3:7, it says, likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, treating her as an employee and having her work all day and then come home and you sit on the couch while she does the dishes is not living with her in an understanding way. It's not showing honor to her. It says show honor to the woman as a weaker vessel. And that weaker there is not a reference to her physical strength. It's a reference to the fact that she is more refined and more sensitive. In fact, she teaches the man to be sensitive, and that takes a lot of time. After being married for quite a while, more than 27 years, I can tell you that I'm just now starting to understand some of the things that my wife would have to teach me. Since they are heirs with you in the grace of life, they are your partner, so that your prayers may not be hindered. And there's a passage in Malachi that talks about people who have not treated their wives right, and they flood the Lord's altar with tears, but don't get anywhere because they haven't repented in regards to how they treat their wives. Now, there are women that go to church that unfortunately have abusive husbands, and they get told to submit to their husband like that's going to fix everything. Those passages that talk about women witnessing to their husbands by submitting to them are not dealing with an abusive husband. And if you understood the entire counsel of the Word of God, you would not do this thing. In Deuteronomy 24, verses 1 through 4, we read where Moses gave Israel a procedure for divorcing their wives. This is the same God that told us how much he hates divorce and how much divorce shouldn't ever happen. So why was he allowing it at all? Well, in Matthew 19, 1 through 9, Jesus was asked the same question, and he said, Moses wrote you this law because your hearts were hard. If you go and examine it, you're going to find out that Deuteronomy 24, verses 1 through 4, was given for cases of marital unfaithfulness. It was given so that the women would not be exploited. They wouldn't simply be abandoned. It was given to prevent all sorts of abuse. And so once you begin to understand that, you realize it was also given to prevent spousal abuse, even though you won't really find the word abuse in that passage. You have to look at the context of things. You can't be stupid about this. And I would add one other thing. If your wife really was your employee, if she really were your indentured servant, you're instructed to treat her with a special kindness in Exodus 23:9. And if she really were your servant elsewhere, you're instructed to set her free. You might say, well, that's in the Old Testament. Well, buddy, Jesus said, if you relax the least of these commandments, you're the least in the kingdom of heaven. And if you don't believe Jesus, at least look in the New Testament. There's an entire letter. It's the book of Philemon. It's a very short read, and it's all about how we're supposed to set our slaves free. If you're going to treat your wife as a slave, you need to set her free. But all of this leaves open the question of the husband's headship. What is this role the husband has as head of the house? Of course, he's to lay down his life for her if necessary and do whatever it takes to provide a good home for her. But his position as headship is that he sets the spiritual tone in the house. There are households where the husband's not able or ready to do this. And in those cases, the women must step up. And yes, that is biblical. We can find plenty of examples in the Bible of women stepping up into that role. Once the husband begins to understand that they as a couple have calling together as man and wife, it's his job to set the spiritual tone. The wife is his partner, not his chattel. So when they both get home from work because of this two-income trap that we built for ourselves and they're exhausted, he doesn't just get to sit on the couch while she takes care of the house. He pitches in and makes sure that it doesn't get to be too overwhelming for her. He makes sure that she gets to enjoy life too, along with him. She works at his side. Their visions and calling in life become one. He needs her wisdom and insight to lead wisely. And it's not that he doesn't have wisdom in himself. And sometimes it rarely happens, but sometimes she will be wrong and he'll have to correct that. But likewise, it's her job to correct him too. And even when they are wrong, they have good reasons for their opinions. So we never just discount what the other one is thinking. So next time you feel like telling her to go make a sandwich, try making her the sandwich and see what happens. Might get a better result.